Shortly before Donald Trump won the presidency, Pew Research asked Americans whether they thought his election would improve or worsen race relations in the country. A quarter of those who responded said things would improve, fewer than half the percentage that said the same about former President Barack Obama shortly before the 2008 election. Since then, the percentage saying race relations have improved under Trump tanked, with only 8% in a new survey indicating their belief that things have improved. 60% of respondents said the opposite, things have gotten worse thanks to Trump's election. It's easy to see why that perception would exist. The racially loaded language and policies Trump offered on the campaign trail were seen by some as echoing the sort of rhetoric employed by white nationalists and racists. He was excoriated for his response to the violent protests in Charlottesville in August, in which he suggested there was equal validity to the concerns of Nazi sympathizers and those who protested Nazism and racism. A post-ABC poll released last month found that half the country sees Trump as biased against black people. Most Americans, Pew found, see race relations as generally bad to a lesser extent than they did after the Los Angeles riots in 1992 or after the death of Michael Brown in 2014, but more so than in the most recent years. Despite that grim assessment, though, the divide between white and black wasn't the divide that was most obvious to Americans. There was one divide that more than half the country described as being a very strong conflict, the divide between Democrats and Republicans. The partisan divide was described as very strong by far more people than any of the other divides surveyed, including the racial divide and the economic divide. About as many people said there was a very strong conflict between Democrats and Republicans as said there was any strong conflict between black and white Americans. This echoes a survey Pew released in October. That survey asked people for their opinions on a range of policy issues. For the most part, there was only a modest difference in responses based on gender, race, or education. There was a broad divide, though, between people in different political parties, a divide that has consistently grown since about 2004. The issues Pew was asking about were to some extent political, which would explain differing partisan views. But they also included questions that didn't seem to have a direct relationship to politics, such as the sorts of neighborhoods people preferred. Even on those questions, there was a sharp divide on partisan lines. In other words, not only do Americans view the divide between Democrats and Republicans as stark, it's reflected in polling asking how they actually feel about issues. To some extent, this is a function of how white partisans view one another. Pew provided the Post with data showing the partisan gulf solely among white respondents. That divide was wider than the overall partisan divide, indicating that the partisan divide for non-whites was narrower. We've seen clear evidence of the depth of the partisan divide in other polls, of course.